Aloha. We have been led through 2 years of work together to where we have realized that harmony in our experience can only be attained through prayer. And the prayer can only be rightly understood when we know the nature of God. We have already seen that prayer, as it is usually known in the world, isn't really prayer, or if it is certainly not effective prayer. We have discovered that it is necessary to go higher in our understanding and practice of prayer than anything we have heretofore known. And in trying to pray aright, we have made the discovery that it is first of all necessary to know God, to know the nature of God. The Infinite Way sets forth the principle of God as one, based really on the Hebrew Testament. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, confirmed by the Master Christian when he gave the world one commandment of the 10, the first commandment, the commandment to acknowledge God as the only power, as the only presence. Now, to declare God as one, to declare God as the only power, is of no avail, until one follows that declaration or realization with the understanding that in that oneness which God is, there can be no lesser powers. Here you have the first inkling of the true nature of prayer, or the nature of true prayer. If God is the only power, there would be no need to pray to God for help over some other power, or for help to overcome some other power, or eliminate the effects of some other power. If God were understood as one life, there would be no fear of death. Now, for a moment, follow me in a meditation on the subject of the nature of God, because through this we will come to the nature of efficacious prayer, effective prayer. We understand that God is life. But if this is true, God is the life of all being. Whether we see that life as human, animal, vegetable, mineral, that life, which is God, is immortal and eternal and self-sustaining. In this light, it would be unnecessary to pray God to give life or to preserve life, or to protect from death, or to save from death, since that one life, which is the life of all being, that life we call God, is itself immortal, eternal, self-sustaining. Yes, and God is law. But in that oneness of God, we find oneness of law. And since God is spirit, all law must be spiritual. There would be no need then to pray God to overcome or remove or destroy some lesser law. Then such things as laws of infection or contagion, laws of age or decomposition, laws of climate or food, these would not be law at all. If we acknowledge God as one law, one power, and so there would be no need of praying God to set aside some law, overcome some law, or help us in the demonstration of law, since God, the self-sustained, would be self-sustaining as law. God is love, says John. But if God is one, God is the only law, the only love, and the only law of love, and the only love of law, one. Since God is love, and God is infinite, and God is self-sustained, there is no need to pray to God for love or for help in overcoming hate, envy, jealousy, or malice. Since the allness of God, the allness of love, would make any such things as envy, jealousy, malice, hate, of none effect, of none power, of none presence. I read in an article by William Law, the British mystic, a bit in which he likens God to the sun. And he says that the nature of the sun is light. And therefore, it is impossible for the sun to give off darkness. We go a step further and say, yes, the sun, the nature of the sun is light, and the nature of the sun is warmth. And it would be impossible for the sun to give off either darkness or cold. The nature of the sun, mark this, will you? The nature of the sun is light and warmth, and it has no power to give off anything except light and warmth. It has no power to give off darkness or cold. There would be no use praying to the sun to overcome darkness or cold, since in its very nature there is no darkness or cold. But the nature of God is life, law, and love. Then would it not be impossible for God, whose nature is love, to give off hate, malice? Would it not be impossible in the nature of God as law for God to give off infection, contagion, material law of any kind? If God is mind, the source of all intelligence, would it not be impossible in the very nature of God to give off stupidity, insanity, ignorance, fear? In other words, mark this, the nature of God is such in its oneness that it can only give off its own nature, just as the sun can only give off its own nature. Now we have seen that the sun's nature is light and warmth, and therefore the sun can only give off of its own nature light and warmth. The nature of God being love, law, mind, power, it would not be in the nature of God to give off anything but its own nature and quality. In our meditation, let us see that we ponder this idea of God as one, following it through life, law, power, love, substance, cause, and follow each one carefully until we come to the realization that this being the law, or rather this being the nature of God, God's only capacity would be to express itself in its own nature. And God being infinite, there is naught beside it. Now, as you contemplate, as you meditate, as you ponder this truth, you will come into the realization of the true nature of prayer. And the first thing you will learn is how useless it is to ask God for love, life, law, harmony, peace, since these being the nature of God, that is all God can express, and God is infinitely expressing its own nature eternally. Never again would you pray to God for some form of good. Never again would you pray to God for protection from some form of evil. What form of evil exists? if God is the infinite, causative, creative principle and can only express its own nature? In this meditation, you are beginning to catch the real nature of prayer, which is a communion with God or a communion with truth. You see, everything that we have been declaring is a statement of truth. Therefore, you may say that I am communing with truth. I am communing in truth. My communion is truth revealed, truth realized, God revealed, God realized, since God is truth. The recognition of the nature of God as good, the recognition of the nature of that which presents itself to us as error, the recognition of such erroneous forms as illusion, as appearance, as suggestion, these realizations constitute prayer. Not turning to God for something, not asking, petitioning, not even affirming. Think of our position if tonight we were to pray for a full moon. Yes, you look out that window and see how foolish our prayer would be, since the full moon is there. And even God hasn't the power to withhold from us a full moon. Nor has God the power to withhold from us the rising sun in the morning, or the setting sun tomorrow evening. All that God is pouring forth to us in infinite abundance, and not even God has the power to withhold it. We have the power to deprive ourselves of good by our non-recognition of its presence as the very nature and activity of God. We may, for a time, separate ourselves from supply, from health, from companionship, from home, but only in one way, and that is by accepting the belief that these are being withheld from us, and that in some way we must pray for them. Let this be clear at this moment. To pray for the realization of God's presence is good prayer. To pray that the Father within reveal himself is good prayer. The reason is that we as humans have accepted a sense of separation from God. Very few in the last several thousand years have accepted the teaching that the Father is within us. Very few. Most people still pray to a God for that which God is infinitely pouring forth through its very nature, which God itself has no power to withhold. many still pray to God as if God were a power that could be used over some forms of evil. There is no such God. There is no such power. The power of God lies in its oneness, in the fact that its power of good is the only power. And effective prayer is the realization of this truth, communing in this truth, abiding in this Word of God, resting in it, dwelling in it, until the realization dawns in consciousness, why, yes, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. You see, in the revelation that I and the Father are one, you find fulfillment. You find yourself in the realization of God's abundance pouring in us, through us, from us. But this cannot come to any individual merely by reading such statements or making such declarations. One must learn to meditate, to ponder, to commune. One must learn to look out at nature and witness the unfolding of God's beauty, of God's grace, of God's power, of God's abundance, until one is absolutely sure that there is no withholding power and that there is no evil power. Now we come right to the heart and soul of the message of the infinite way. You see, the world has accepted two powers, and while intellectually it agrees that God is the greater power and can overcome these lesser or evil powers, nevertheless it doesn't actually accept even that degree of revelation, since certainly the world fears evil more than it trusts God. The world fears lack more than it trusts God's abundance. The world fears death more than it trusts God's power to maintain infinite, eternal, harmonious life. The world fears disease more than it trusts God's ability to maintain health. Now, it isn't going to be enough merely to accept God as a great power able to overcome sin or disease or fear or lack. It is not going to suffice to accept God as able to protect from fear, lack, disease, death. It is going to be necessary for every individual to commune within his own being until the dawn of that realization of God as the only one, the only presence, the only power, the only life, the only soul, the only principle of man's being. This is one reason why the Master warned us about public prayer. Oh, he said those who pray in public will get their reward, yes, in proportion to their faith or belief. some good will come to them. But he cautions us, his followers, against public worship, public prayers, praying where men can see our prayers. Because usually we are praying to be seen of men, in order that others may think us righteous men and women. When we really want to pray, when we really want to go to God in earnest, the one thing that we require above all is privacy, quietness, solitude, an atmosphere of peace. The last thing in the world we want is a witness. Our prayers, our inner communions, are so sacred that they must be secret. Exactly like our benevolences. Never, never believe that your benevolences, your charities, are of any value to you if anyone knows about them. Never. Never, never. You may see lists in the newspaper, columns long, of those who contribute to this and contribute to that, and it's a blessing that they do because someone is benefiting by those contributions, but the ones who are not benefiting are the donors. Be assured of that. This is a spiritual principle. Giving, which is a form of prayer, because it is doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. It is loving our neighbor as ourselves. Therefore it is prayer. The prayer of benevolence, charity, giving, helpfulness is sacred. Being sacred, it must be secret. It must be something between the Father and ourselves. Why? Because you never give anything of your own. Whatever you give is God's. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Remember that. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, not yours. You may be a custodian this moment of $1 or 1 million, but it is not yours. And therefore, in your giving, you are merely acting as an agent for the Father. And the Father wants no publicity, because the Father's love is universal, impersonal, and impartial. Giving must be in secret. Giving must be as secret as praying, and praying must never be done before the world. You see, when we come together in meditation, that is a form of prayer, but it is just a little different than the praying that we do when we go to God alone. When we go to God alone, it is as if, let us say, we were going home for a visit with Mother, and we had some confidences that we didn't wish to share with the rest of the world, but we knew we could rest our confidences in her bosom. And we also knew that Mother would never divulge our secrets, nor hold us in condemnation even to our sins. Mother's love would be a forgiving love. And so as we individually go to prayer, we do not merely realize this nature of God as love in the abstract, But we come right down to the personal and realize that since the nature of God is love, that love includes the quality of forgiveness of our sins, sins of omission, sins of commission. There is none here, there is none within range of my voice or print who is without sin in their human experience. Certainly this is true when we realize that sin has other meanings than just the church meaning. We are all, in some measure, faulty in loving our neighbor as ourselves, in forgiving 70 times 7, in praying for our enemy, and so in this intimacy, in this aloneness with God, in this communion with God, we not only realize the nature of God as love, but we realize God's forgiveness of our unlovingness. When we come together in meditation, it is for the purpose of realizing God, and more especially for the presence of God on earth, for a realization of God's presence in our consciousness, and usually it is for each other, more than for some personal problem. When we come together in meditation, as we are here this evening, it is not that I personally may gain some good from this, but rather that whatever light may touch my consciousness may bless you. In the same way, in your joint meditation, it should be your great desire that your heart, your consciousness be opened to receive God, that God may flow through you, not only to those gathered here, but to all those anywhere in the world reaching out to God. I have given our classes this high vision of prayer as I have seen it and as has been given me to establish among the students of the Infinite Way, and then ultimately to whatever part of the world can receive it. And that is this. We, by our meditation, bring into experience the very presence of God. We, by not taking thought for ourselves, but lifting our consciousness to God, bring God here to this room, to this universe, to this world, as a tangible presence. Then anyone, metaphysician or not, church member or atheist, anyone reaching out beyond the boundaries of their self to the nature of some form of infinity, they, by virtue of our realization, find available the very presence of the Christ, the very presence of God. Someday you will see that any person anywhere on the globe will only have to think the word Christ or God and find God instantly available. Why? Because throughout the world, groups like this and individuals will be opening their consciousness to this omnipresence of the Christ and thereby make it available to all who reach out. I have seen this in practice, that where I attained a conscious awareness, a conscious realization of the presence of God, that a patient or student who had asked for help received their help through my realization of the presence of God. I have also seen that many of our students, in their meditation and prayer, have achieved a consciousness of God's presence and found that their patients or their relatives or their friends, any who were attuned to them, had also received healing, consolation, protection. And so, in following this work through the many years, I have learned that the nature of prayer is the realization of God's presence, and that the presence of God realized becomes a law of healing, of harmony, of wholeness to all who are attuned to the one praying. Do you follow that? The nature of prayer is a realization, an actual experience of God's presence. And the experience of God's presence becomes available to all who are attuned to me as a law of healing, harmony, wholeness, and completeness. And so I know this, that where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst, and therefore that I, that Christ, is available to all who lift their thought to the Word God or Christ or anything else that means to them God or Christ. They may think of it as Tao or Brahm or Spirit or Darshan. We care not what language they speak. We are very much like the story of Joan of Arc. When asked, does God speak to you in French? And her answer is, I do not know what language God speaks. I hear him in French. And so to us it makes no difference whether you are reaching out to Christ, to God, to the Son of God, to Jesus, to Brahm, to Spirit, Darshan, Tao. You are reaching to the infinite invisible, and the realization of God in my consciousness makes that available to you. The realization of God in your consciousness makes this presence and power available to all within your family range, your friendship range, your community range, and all those who reach out. And ultimately, by placing this band of God realization around the world, even those who have never heard of metaphysics, those who have never heard of truth teachings, those who have never heard of the infinite way, just by lifting their thought, even in danger, to some concept of God, will find God instantly available. You yourselves have seen proof of this. If you have ever gone into a church, any church, where no one was there, and just rested there in peace, in quietness, sometimes to pray, other times just to rest quietly in a holy atmosphere, and you have gone out of there benefited. Yes, you went out benefited because, first of all, you were led to where you knew the presence of God is. Secondly, because some consecrated minister or rabbi or priest kept his church filled with the realization of God's presence. Never forget this. Any sincere, earnest minister, rabbi, priest, convinced within himself of the nature of God as love, is automatically filling his edifice, even his clothing, with the very presence and power of God, and your walking into that edifice drops the burden from your shoulders and enables you to feel a release, a lightness, a healing, a consolation, a solution to your problem. Remember this. It isn't necessary that you walk into this edifice. It is enough that you walk into my consciousness. And if I maintain my consciousness filled with the realization of God's presence, of the nature of God as love, of one, you automatically feel the power of light and of love descend upon you. Healing grace touches you. You ride in a bus or any public conveyance and have your thought filled with the realization of God, and notice the effect upon your neighbor, upon someone in that bus. Sometimes it will be brought directly to your attention. At other times you may not know the blessing that you have been. It is one thing to ride the bus busy with newspapers, radio, fears, doubts. Quite another thing to leave all those things outside the bus and carry in with you the realization of God's presence. Not only the blessing is yours, more especially the blessing is upon those who come into that bus troubled and not knowing how to be freed of their troubles. We at least know this. There is a freedom from all troubles, and that freedom is attained in proportion to our realization, our inner communion with this divine spirit, in the realization of its oneness, of its nature as an expressing love, not withholding. Go back again. The nature of the sun is warmth and light, and it has no power to express other than that. The nature of God is love and law and life, being, presence, harmony, peace. And God has no power to express other than its own nature. And when you come up against an appearance contrary to that, know it for what it is. Get thee behind me, Satan. I know that you are neither presence nor power, but a seeming, an illusion, something that would tempt me to believe that God can give or withhold, something that would tempt me to believe that I am in the position of a lack, when God itself has no power to create a lack. God's power is to fill all space, but with what? Its own being, its own nature. For 2 years now, we have been leading up to where I could say to you, God is love. The nature of God is fulfillment. Repeat that. The nature of God is fulfillment. The nature of God is fulfillment. How then can you find in this universe a lack of fulfillment when the nature of God is to express itself And God itself has no power other than to express its own nature and being. And the nature of God is fulfillment. It makes no difference whether you're thinking of health, supply, morals, protection. It makes no difference what form of human experiences in your mind at this moment. God's nature is fulfillment. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have it more abundantly. Where then did you find lack, or limitation, or sin, or disease, or fear, except in the false teachings of the world? Only in the false teachings of the world, that which separated us from the child of God, the Son of God, the Christ of God. One thing will separate you from your good, the belief in two powers. This, above all, will separate you from your good. But the realization of God as one power will forever prevent you praying to God. And the moment you stop praying to God, you find fulfillment. Because then your prayer isn't to God, your prayer is a communion in God. The moment you stop praying for something, you are on the way to your fulfillment. To pray to God for something is to acknowledge lack. This is to acknowledge God as being either evil or stupid. Believe me, there is no benefit in a prayer that underestimates the nature of God, or that does not understand the nature of God. We have entered tonight upon a deep, deep principle of prayer. And I say to you, when you can sit in prayer, when you can sit in meditation or communion with no desire in your heart for anything, with no request to God for anything, but with complete satisfaction in thy will be done, not mine. Thy will be done, not mine. Thou art a God of fulfillment. The nature of God is fulfillment. I am come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. Is there any other God beside me, says Isaiah? Is there any other power? Is there any other presence? I know not any. To understand God as the one power, the one law, the one life, is to forever free you of fear. Never again can you fear. Once you have relaxed into this quiet meditation, this peaceful, serene, sacred, and secret meditation, and there learn to love God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy being. Love God with all thy heart means to trust God, not to trust God to overcome a lot of devils, but to trust God to be the only power, and disregard these devils of the world. They are not power, they are not presence, they are exactly what the Master said when he stood before Pilate. And Pilate said, I have power to crucify you or set you free, and the Master said, no. Thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father in heaven. Why, the Master knew God was the only power. The only power. Not just a great power, the only power. Why then fear some person? Why take thought for man whose breath is in his nostrils? Wherein is he to be accounted of? Why fear man, or condition, or time, or bond? Why, if once you understand the nature of God is a giving God, a fulfilling God, not a withholding God. God is fulfillment. You see, only the understanding of the nature of God will reveal to you the true nature of prayer. And only the true nature of prayer will bring you into the contact and demonstration of your harmony. Only through prayer do we attain God's grace. And we will never attain God's grace without an understanding of the nature of God. How easy it is to pray for our enemies. This too is a part of the understanding of prayer. Until we learn to pray for our enemies, we are holding them in bondage to a belief of a presence and power apart from God. We acknowledge for ourselves that God is not a God of punishment, that the nature of God is in itself forgiveness, and in the nature of forgiveness, eternal, infinite forgiveness. There could be no sign of punishment. Well, you acknowledge that for yourself, then to love thy neighbor as thyself and to pray for thine enemy is to acknowledge also that since the nature of God is forgiveness, not even your enemy is held in punishment. Not even your enemy is held in punishment. Did you know that there is no such thing as God's punishment? The only punishment that man ever experiences is from his own conscience, from his violation of his own sense of right, which comes back at him and takes a price. There is no such thing in all the world as God punishing sin. If God ever punished sin, Jesus would have been violating God's law in forgiving the woman taken in adultery, in forgiving the thief on the cross, in forgiving the man who came to take him prisoner to the execution. Oh, you know, the Master never thwarted God's law. And the Master gave us that precept: neither do I condemn them. Who made me a judge over Israel? Judge not after appearances. Who did sin, this man or his parents? Neither. So you see that in giving us these teachings of forgiving 70 times 7 and of even forgiving our enemies, he was saying to us so clearly, God does not punish. Then, to be godlike, you must hold no one in punishment. Therefore, your love must be the love of forgiveness. Forgive 70 times 7. Pray for your enemies. Pray for those that despitefully use you. Be assured, if you go to the altar to pray, there remember that any man has aught against thee, first get up and make your peace. Then come back and give your gifts. Please remember that if you are holding anyone in condemnation, you are not yet in prayer. You are only in communion with God when you love your neighbor as yourself. When you forgive your enemies, even 70 times 7. When you come to the altar with a pure heart. To come with a pure heart means to come with a realization that the nature of God is grace, but that the nature of God's grace is for saints and sinners. Release these condemnations. Release these fears. Come to God with a pure heart. The pure in heart shall see God. But the pure in heart are those who come to the throne having made their peace with the brother, having made their peace with all men inwardly. Oh, we can't always do that with those out in the world. They won't accept it of us. They won't understand us. It isn't always possible to go to those who do not like us or do not trust us and explain or tell of our forgiveness. They might resent it. They might not understand it. It's all done within our own being. As long as we are pure in heart and have done the best we can to make peace with our neighbor, we have done it all. This is prayer. Make thy peace with thy brother, forgive thine enemies 70 times 7, be at peace, love thy neighbor as thyself, and commune with God in the realization that God is fulfillment. The nature of God is fulfillment. Don't ask God to be good. Don't ask God for love, for health, for supply, for home, for companions, for protection. Don't ask God. Go secretly into God. Get inside of God and dwell there. Rest there. Be at peace there. And let God be its own law of fulfillment without telling it how to run its universe. God is really love. And in this love, there is no fear, no doubt. Thank you and aloha.